Okay, hello everybody. Thanks very much for tuning in today. I'm just going to start presenting my slides properly now. So welcome to our webinar, Analysing Engagement, Showcasing Success for Irish Institutions. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get into the main session. If you have any questions, please just pop them in the Q&A box. Let us know if you can't hear or see, and we'll do what we can to help. And the webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to review it afterwards or share it with colleagues if that will be useful for you. Our speakers today, I'm Kat. Hello, welcome. I run the marketing for Altmetric. With me are my colleague Stephen. Stephen runs institutional marketing at Digital Science, and Liam Cleere from the research office at UCD, who will be speaking later about their own use case. And what we'll cover today, so I'll do a brief introduction to Altmetric, the company. We'll take a closer look at the Irish research landscape. Then, as I mentioned, Liam will present the UCD view of things, and at the end, there will be time for questions. So, what is Altmetric? Altmetric is a data science company. We're based in London, and we're actually a portfolio company of Digital Science, the group that Stephen works for. Digital Science invests in a range of technology startups that make tools and services that meet different aspects of the research space. And what we do at Altmetric is we collect Altmetrics and present them to authors, publishers, institutions. And when we say Altmetrics, what we really mean is indicators of online engagement that complement traditional citation impact metrics. So when you think about like article-to-article citations, or even downloads or other view counts, Altmetrics are really designed to complement those existing traditional bibliometric indicators. So Altmetrics capture things like commentary or references from Wikipedia, discussions on peer review platforms, commentary on social media, so networks like Twitter and Facebook, coverage in the mainstream news media, so for example in sources like the BBC or CNN or other online outlets, citations in non-journal sources, so for example policy documents or even mentions in places like Reddit, and then also engagement on scholarly platforms, so post-publication peer review, as I've mentioned, places like F1000 as well. And crucially, we don't just collect the data for articles, but it's actually for any type of research output. So it might be a data set, a clinical trial, a book chapter. We collate all of this information together to help create or to help you see a bigger picture of how people have been engaging with your research. And when I say we collate all of that data, we're actually talking about quite a lot of data. So at the moment, we see over 18,000 unique outputs being shared each day, and over 150,000 mentions of those outputs. That equates to a mention every 0.7 seconds and over 15 million API calls a day. So there's an awful lot running through our system that we're collating, disambiguating, and then trying to present to our users in a really meaningful way that can help them understand where, why, and how their research is being disseminated and used. And along with the theme of kind of making sense of those mentions, this is how we present that data. So at the top here, you can see what we call the Altmetric details page. This is the collated record of attention that we create for each item. So you might see one of these for an article, one that perhaps looks slightly different for a book or a book chapter. And you can click through the details page. You can explore the individual tabs to see all of the original mentions. So you really see not just, okay, 20 tweeters have tweeted about this, but what they actually said or didn't say, and whether it was positive or negative, or they were adding a comment or just sharing the work. When we present this details page, you can access it via our various platforms. So whether it's via the badges that you might see on institutional repositories or publisher sites, or in our Altmetric Explorer platform, which you'll probably hear a little bit about later, or via our API. So we offer data access, so you can present the data how you like, or you can integrate it into other internal systems. And we're working with a lot of people to deliver this data. So we're capturing it all and delivering it through those platforms to a variety of institutions, funders, publishers, and those range from the very big, so people like Springer Nature or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation shown here, to much smaller kind of university presses or perhaps publishers with just a few journals. And with that, I will hand over to Stephen, who will give us a closer look at the Irish research landscape.
Thank you very much, Kat, for that. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephen Cawley. I'm the Head of Institutional Marketing here at Digital Science. And Kat very kindly asked me to come on today and speak a little bit about Altmetric, I guess, in the context of the broader digital science portfolio, because we have many assets here within the company, not just Altmetric, which looks at measuring engagement, but also the indicators of impact. And we have other databases that can give citation information, that can store data sets, etc. So I wanted to give the broader picture. Next slide. When we think about, I suppose, engagement, it goes hand in hand with impact. And certainly in Ireland at the moment, we hear about Agenda 2020 coming from Science Foundation Ireland. Obviously, since Science Foundation Ireland was set up, there's been a tremendous investment in the Irish research system, and very much the foundation has been established. Ireland, obviously is a world-class player in research, doing very excellent research, but also the challenge is to, I suppose, try and articulate the stage-appropriate outcomes from the research process and show not only the excellence of the research, but also how the research is applied in other broader societal and economic contexts. With that in mind, I just had a very, very quick look at our data to see, how Ireland has been performing, since 2008. And I think it's fair to say on a world level, it has been a very, very productive system. If we look at, publications, patents, even the Orange Book patents, which is quite interesting. So the Orange Book patents are patents that offer protection for pharmaceutical drugs that have been approved by the FDA for safety and efficacy. So that's an important, I suppose, economic indicator that we can link back to the research process. And of course, also clinical trials. It's also interesting, I suppose, to do not a comprehensive benchmarking exercise, but just benchmark that performance maybe against some other comparator countries of a similar size. So let's take Denmark and New Zealand. And you see, obviously, Denmark shows an outstanding performance across the world relative to its size. But I think, we would say certainly, Ireland has fared well if you compare it to New Zealand, for example. And it's interesting to see how prolific the system has been in the production of patents. That might be explained in some ways by the large amount of foreign direct investment and the large private sector that exists in Ireland. I also thought then that I'd look into our data and see, just what are the highlights, if you like, from the Irish system. And I think this was a very, very interesting form of impact that I came across. It was actually a research article that was part of a mass cross-European collaboration. The Irish collaborator was actually Professor Anne Scott from Dublin City University. And it was actually a nurse staffing study, which showed quite comprehensively that nurse cutbacks actually were linked to higher death rates. This, not surprisingly, had a high Altmetric score, given that it created a lot of conversation online. What was also interesting was that actually it featured in 3 policy documents, included a policy document issued by the World Health Organization on this particular topic. So one form of impact. Another very interesting highlight, I looked into those publications and I tried to find the, if you like, the research article or output that had the highest academic citation impact based on the relative citation ratio, which was co-developed by Digital Science and the National Institutes of Health. And it looks at the citation network, if you like, for articles, and it provides a normalized view on the impact of that article. And actually, an article that was published by Desmond G. Higgins, formerly in University College Cork, but I believe, Liam, he's a colleague of yours now at University College Dublin, wrote this article. But in fact, it wasn't just an article. Actually, this was a computer program called Clustal. It was actually used to do multiple sequencing, which is very, very important in the field of bioinformatics. So key not just for research, but also for industrial use. And according to Nature, this is one of the most cited papers of all time. So it's nice to see, again, Ireland performing on the world level and providing highly cited papers, and not, I suppose, original research articles in the truest sense, but actually this is something different. This is about a software program that was developed as an innovation within the academic system. So very interesting. I think another area, and it's a personal interest of mine, I think, is looking beyond publications and actually looking at patents. The famous Harvard professor for economics, Michael Porter, told us that patents were the key indicator of innovation. And I'd just like to ask the question, maybe it's a point of discussion for both Liam, I suppose, and some of our attending delegates from Ireland today, but, have the production of patents and the role of Irish academic institutions in the production of patents, has it been studied in depth by the system? And also, have these types of key questions been asked? So, for example, the very, very important triadic patents. These are patent families that come from the major three patent offices, the European Patent Office, and the Japanese Patent Office, and the US Patent Office. Have they been looked at in detail, and which triadic patents have the Irish universities produced? Who are the inventors of these patents out of the Irish university system, and what kinds of spin-off companies have those inventors produced? Have those spin-off companies produced significant amount of private investment as we look at impact? Also looking at the non-patent references within those patents could help to disclose and prove, I suppose, the importance of the funded underlying research programs behind those inventions. And also, I think looking at the patents help us to kind of understand better the academic corporate collaborations. I'm saying this because this is the kind of data that digital science can make available to you alongside the use of Altmetric, and just giving you some headline statistics here. Just before I finish, just some other highlights. Obviously, spin-off companies are important when you're looking at impact of research. This is one well-known example from Trinity. I believe Professor Luke O'Neill and Dr. Kingston Mills, of course, set up Opsona off their world-class work in immunology in toll-like receptors and treatment of inflammatory diseases. I looked again at Professor O'Neill's work and ran some of his papers through Altmetric, and I see that he has come up with another fairly significant research breakthrough in terms that he's identified that this molecule MCC 950 can be used in the treatment of several fairly serious diseases. And as a result of that, he's just set up another spin-off company off this research and has attracted $17 million in funding from Novartis, which was reported and captured in Altmetric from Fierce Biotech, the important pharmaceutical news source. So I just wanted to leave you with those thoughts. At this point, I think I'll hand over to Liam and we can take questions afterwards. Thank you, Kat.
Lovely. Thank you, Stephen. So Liam, if you're ready, I will just hand over the screen sharing to you now.
Okay, thank you.
I think I'm going to have to make you the host actually to be able to do that, but hopefully that should work. You now have the option to share.
Okay. No. Very good.
Perfect.
Do you see my screen?
Yeah.
We can.
Very good. Okay, thanks very much for asking me to say a few words on what we've done with Altmetric here at UCD. I think we're quite early stage in terms of our development and use of Altmetric for institutions. But I hope to give a kind of flavor of some of the things that we've done so far. But before I do that, I'd like to just explain a little bit about the Irish context for research impact. Now, back in 2006, impact was really around building capacity and doubling PhD numbers, and that was very much articulated in the first report on the strategy for science, technology, and innovation. And since then, there have been various different kind of builds on this theme, and we first kind of dabbled majorly into bibliometric analysis, and the HEA and Forfus did that back in 2009. Following on from the financial crisis, then there was very much a focus on jobs and foreign direct investment, and Science Foundation Ireland would have kind of led the implementation of that policy across Ireland. And I suppose that emphasis is still there within the system, and especially through research that is funded through SFI. So I think some of the kind of early work around impact was very much top down and led by funding agencies and funders of research in Ireland. But critically, we don't have a national impact framework like what exists in the United Kingdom, where you have the Research Excellence Framework. We haven't got an equivalent to that at the moment. Impact then in the Irish universities, I think we have quite a fragmented approach to both the definition and the capturing and the measuring of research impact. I think over the years, we've developed a lot of knowledge around academic impact, so bibliometrics and saying, how good or bad certain publications are. Some of the major funding agencies too have also articulated what they believe impact to be, and we're very much cognizant of that. Also, there's a lot of the traditional kind of innovation viewpoint on impact, so it is measuring the patents and the licenses and the traditional kind of spin-outs and things like that, and that's still a very important aspect, but I suppose it's one dimension of what we think impact is. I suppose there's a general confusion then around what research impact means, and there has been some evidence too of the use of research impact case studies to capture impact and to communicate it to a wider audience. But I suppose in summary, we're at quite an early stage in both the definition and the capture, and definitely the measuring of research impact. So at UCD, our definition of impact is very similar to those used, say, in the Research Council's UK, and also in other jurisdictions. For example, Science Foundation Ireland has a similar definition of research impact in terms of academic and socio-economic impact. For example, the academic impact is really the contribution that excellent research makes to academia, and also the economic and societal impact is the contribution that excellent research makes to the economy and to the society. So in order to kind of visualize what this might look like, impacts then are generally kind of linked to 5 major kind of activities. And even though it's shown as being very sequential, often these activities and these inputs are not all that sequential, and that there can be time gaps between each thing occurring, but they are linked. For inputs, I mean, we have our research funding, we have researchers themselves, we have facilities and equipment, and then there's the activities of doing the research itself and collaborating and theorizing, etc. But then it's very important to make a distinction between outputs, outcomes, and impacts. The outputs are the traditional products of the research, so things like publications and prototypes and patents, new companies, and etc. The outcomes then are kind of the results of those outputs. For example, cited publications or license income from a patent or a prototype, uptake of new devices, and so on. And these eventually then lead to impacts outside of academia and within academia, but very important kind of things like economic impacts, like a spin-out company might employ people and might make profit, for example. You might have environmental impacts around, say, making a river, the water in a river 10% pure and so forth. In health, then you might have things like, drug discovery, and those drugs go on to be saving people's lives. So I think overall we see impact as a kind of a continuum, and basically it's linked to time, but also linked to those 5 key things of inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and all those finally lead to impacts. So at UCD, I suppose we have a fair idea of how to describe academic impact, and we use tools like Elsevier, SciVal, and we use Clarivate Insights, and we have used that in the past more. But I suppose there have been a number of metrics that have come up around impact, and one of the kind of more important ones is the field-weighted citation impact that you can see on the screen. And we can fairly clearly articulate then that we have an impact above world average. And that's quite a useful thing to be able to say to both funders of research, but also policymakers. And we can also track this impact over time. And you can see if it's getting better or worse. And at UCD, these KPIs, or key performance indicators, are linked to the strategy of the university. So they're used to kind of monitor and to measure how well we're achieving our strategic goals. But what about the economic and societal impact? How can we measure that? That's what initially led us to Altmetric for institutions. We wanted to see who was using the knowledge and the research that was developed and articulated through papers, but who was using that in the real world, or at least referencing the research in the real world. And that's where Altmetric for institutions comes in, because it kind of tracks all the output, all the mentions on the on social media and traditional media, in fact, in terms of who is using your research. And we find that very useful to give us an indication of what our actual kind of societal impact has been. So our main kind of use cases around Altmetric were, we wanted to use Altmetrics as part of the university KPIs, and that was a measure of societal impact. We also wanted to find out which journals help us to achieve societal impact. We wanted to use the Altmetric tool to help sharpen research communications and how to promote research and to come up with a better way of doing that. We also wanted to have evidence of societal impact from research, evidence that we can just look at a broad range of outputs and use a tool to kind of give us more information that we don't have anecdotally. And finally, then, we want to analyze some trusted Altmetric data to help articulate specific societal impacts to funding agencies. And I have an example of that later on. So in terms of the implementation approach, we took a kind of two-pronged approach. We took a bottom-up approach and a top-down approach. The top-down approach really was embedding Altmetrics as a measure in the university key performance indicators. And you can see an example of one there, which are Altmetric mentions per article. And that's something that we can compare with other universities as well. And the bottom up then was to provide a guide called Promote Your Research that provides a website to help academics to optimize their research outputs and to use social media to best effect to promote the research outputs so that they'll have the greatest impact that they can have. Looking at the metrics on the KPIs, our main metric is Altmetric mentions per article, and we can use those then to benchmark against other institutions, because it is a normalized measure, mentions per article, and you can see how different institutions are performing in that respect. But we can also go down to the level of a school or a college within the university, and we can see which particular departments or schools might be having a very high kind of social media presence and who are having a lot of attention on their outputs, and you can see an example of that on the screen as well. The bottom-up approach really was producing a website that helps academics to prepare, promote, and monitor their research. So in terms of preparing for research, it's all the usual sort of things about getting a good author name, the correct address on the paper, and publishing in the right journals, and etc. So we have a whole list of these things that people can do before they publish. And then when they publish, we have another list of things that help people to promote those publications, both with social media and traditional media. But finally, I suppose, we had a need to monitor the attention that the publications were receiving. And Altmetric for institutions is definitely very important in that respect, as are other tools like we have an institutional repository here that monitors all our outputs as well. And also we use Google Analytics. So Altmetric attention scores then, another key kind of question that people had about Altmetrics were which journals are publishing and which sources helps to have the most mentions. And as you can see on the screen, we have a list of some of the highly mentioned outlets that we're using, and a lot of them are in physics and Nature and Lancet and the usual kind of high impact journals. And we've seen some correlation between mentions and citations, but it's not as strong as what you might imagine them to be. So I think that link between mentions and social media and actual citations is a little bit tenuous. In terms of sharpening our research communications and promotion strategy then, we looked at a number of things, and one of the things that we did do was to automate a Twitter feed. And how this works is that when an academic updates their profile in the research management system, and this is a system, a CRIS system basically, it automatically generates an RSS feed that can be used by a school or a college or a center. And using a tool called Deliberate, we're able to do targeted communications using Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook to different groups of followers that a school or a college might have, so that every time a new paper is published, the school automatically sends out a tweet or a LinkedIn or a Facebook out to specific groups of followers that might be interested in this paper. And to track the effect of that, then we use Altmetric for institutions to do that. We're also using Altmetrics for institutions to analyze what people are actually tweeting and commenting on papers and social media. But also we're looking at traditional newspapers as well, and finding out how different research themes are getting picked up in the media. And that's at quite an early stage in its development at UCD. Looking then at evidence of social impact from research, Altmetric for institutions was quite useful in that respect as well. Last year we did an exercise where we started to gather some research impact case studies from academics around UCD. And we used the Altmetric for institutions tool to kind of support the claims that were being made in those impact case studies. And I put in an example here of a professor of veterinary medicine who is very much involved in kind of European policy development, and specifically around food safety. And we found that there was a very large number of policy mentions from his work. And it was really only because we had the tool, the Altmetric for institutions tool, that we could find this information in the first place. Another very strong use case for Altmetric for institutions is to look at what is having an impact in the world. And the example that I have here really is around every year Altmetric published the top most mentioned academic papers. So in 2016, UCD had a paper that was number 14 on that list, and it was by a researcher in the School of Agriculture and Food Science, who published a paper as a co-author with about 700 other researchers around the world. But the nature of the study, trends in body mass index in 200 countries, was such that not only was it a highly cited article, but it captured the imagination of a lot of people on social media as well, and in the news media, who tweeted quite a lot about it and wrote about it a lot too. But ultimately, all that research was funded by the Wellcome Trust and was part of the grand challenges in Global Health Initiative. So any time we're putting in new proposals in around this area, we're able to show some evidence of having societal impact and certainly engagement with the world outside of traditional academia. So they're just some of the use cases that I have at the moment. We're continually kind of looking at Altmetric to find out new uses for it. But I suppose they're the main ones that we've been engaged with at the moment. So if there are any questions, then I can take them now.
Wonderful. Thanks very much, Liam. That was a really interesting presentation. If anyone does have questions, please just pop them in the Q&A box, and we will put them to Liam. I have one for you, Liam, if that's all right to get started.
Okay.
What do you think is next for UCD in terms of your use of Altmetrics?
Well, most recently I've been talking to our communications office, who are very interested in finding out who our top researchers are from a communications perspective. And they're analysing a lot of the papers that are in there, but they want to meet some of the highly kind of mentioned people and maybe to profile them on the website and in other fora, so that we can kind of promote our research to a different audience, and maybe pick up people and talk about people that previously we hadn't been focusing in on as much.
Yeah, that's really nice. We saw a similar application actually from the University of South Australia, where they used Altmetrics to identify kind of rising stars that they perhaps wouldn't have otherwise known about, who they could then kind of feature in their videos about their research that they have on their website and things. And I think certainly for them, it was just a nice way to showcase researchers who were maybe in fields that don't always get highly cited or heavily referenced in academia. So it's really interesting to hear now that you're kind of looking at doing something in that area too.
Another big area that we're working on too is to make sure that at the moment we're migrating our CRIS system into a new platform, a symplectic element system. And as part of that process, we're doing a lot of data cleansing. And one of the parts that we're looking at is to ensure that anything that can have a digital object identifier does have a digital object identifier attached to it, so that when we load all this information up into Altmetric for institutions, we'll have the widest picture of what the social media attention looks like on all the papers. Because previously, a lot of papers were missing this key identifier, and therefore they're not discoverable. And we can't track them, and we can't comment on them.
Mm. And it looked like you've made some really amazing materials to help your researchers see how they could better promote their research or kind of make it more visible. How have you found the reception to that? Do people seem to be using them? Are they adapting what they do?
Yeah, I think it occurs in pockets. I mean, we work very closely with the UCD library on kind of disseminating these types of things. I think, well, my experience of it to date is that people who were already quite highly cited and had a good publishing track record and were very strong in terms of their research, got very engaged with it to see if they could get to the next level in terms of getting mentions on social media and discovering who groups of followers might be. But I think we're really early stage at it, because mostly, you see, from an institutional perspective, a lot of people want to be able to prove some kind of a linkage between citation rates and mentions on social media, because if you can influence one, you should be able to influence the other. But we're finding that that isn't always the case, and that it isn't quite so simple as that. But in terms of reputation and finding out who out there are commenting on the publications and who are picking up the research within them, I think that's probably more powerful use at the moment.
Liam, sorry, just a question here from Stephen. In terms of awareness levels and acceptance levels of Altmetrics at this point, have you found over the last number of years, has that increased? Have we gone past the inflection point where Altmetrics are really accepted as a de facto standard for assessing performance?
I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. I think we're very early stage still. I think people have heard of them. Some people know what they look like, and then people are in the kind of discovery phase at the moment in terms of finding out more and seeing how relevant it is. But in terms of kind of a performance management or any kind of a, allocating funds because of anything like that, I think we're a very long way away from that.
Fair enough. Well, it's good to see that you're taking proactive steps to educate people properly on how they should use Altmetrics appropriately when they're looking at their research. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, just picking up on that, actually, I think it is really interesting to see how Altmetrics have been integrated into your KPIs. How does that kind of work on a day-to-day basis? Is there someone whose role it is to check in on the data, or is it something you refer to when needed, or how does that work?
Yeah, basically, the set of KPIs are updated twice a year, once in March and once again in kind of September, October. And we have a person here that does that as part of their job. So, but yeah, I mean, it does take some time to do it. But it also, we have to do similar things for other metrics and other benchmarking information that we look at, because sometimes you don't have an automated tool to bring all these things together. Even though the tools are getting better every day, there's still a bit of manual intervention at times.
Mm-hmm. And do you think having access to the Altmetric data or the Explorer has helped you uncover stories or aspects of your research that perhaps wouldn't have either been so accessible or you might not have known about at all? Or?
Absolutely. I think there's quite a few examples of that. And I put one example in the presentation, actually, of Simon Moore, who is one of our leading professors in veterinary medicine. But I think before we saw his profile in Altmetric, we had no idea at the level and scale of involvement that he had around policy making in the European Union. Just sometimes these things aren't they're not discoverable until you have a tool to help you to do that.
Yeah, I'm sure many people on the webinar know that feeling. Yeah. Well, if there are no more questions, I think we'll leave it there for today. But thanks so much, Liam. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us to present this.
Okay, I've stopped sharing the...
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks very much. And thanks everyone for joining. We'll send round a follow-up email with a link to the recording and, of course, the opportunity to ask any more questions afterwards if you think of anything or would like more information on anything that we talked about today. So with that, thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, everybody.
And thank you, Liam. And goodbye to everyone on the call.
Thanks, Liam. All the best.
Bye.